40 years ago, a young girl in her early 20s left her family, friends, and her job as a teacher in Vietnam behind to set sail on a voyage to freedom. While on her journey, she faced many obstacles. More specifically, she dealt with starvation, dehydration, and even pirates. For 5 days and nights on a small fisherman's boat in the middle of the South China Sea, she lived in fear every day. But yet, she was still hopeful that she would eventually make it to a refugee camp. And that wish came true. She stayed at a refugee camp in Malaysia until a country would take her in. While waiting, she passed countless opportunities to become a citizen in Canada, England, and even Australia. So you're probably wondering, why did she wait? She was simply seeking the American dream. That young lady was my mom. Even though my mom's journey was grueling and tough, that wasn't the only challenge. The real challenge began once she stepped foot in this country. My mom came into the United States with barely any money, and she barely understood English. So as you can imagine, it was very difficult for her to get by in society, and not to mention deal with the discrimination while trying to obtain her citizenship. Like my mom's story, the struggle to become an American is a difficult process. But how difficult is it today? Now, I broke up this issue into 3 different categories. Each category represents what a modern-day immigrant would most likely have to go through today. The first one being eligibility. With the steady increase of crises in the world every day, the number of refugees dramatically increased, and the question to even be considered to be admitted to the U.S. lies on a piece of legislation. As of right now, the Syrian conflict has created one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. More than 5.6 million Syrians have fled their country in search for peace and freedom. And not to mention, most of them were forced out of their own homes. And here's the issue. As of 2017, President Donald Trump signed a couple of executive orders affecting the current nation's immigration policies. One order was signed to prevent terrorist attacks by preventing Syrians from the immigration program for an unknown amount of time. And by doing so, President Trump halved the annual cap of refugees admitted to the U.S. from 100,000 to 50,000 a year. Yet if we compare this issue to the Indo-Chinese crisis, the U.S. was able to admit at least 2 million refugees, and my mom was one of the 2 million. So what I mean is, if we were able to do it in the past, we could do it again, if not even better in the future. Because it is time that the current legislation finally needs to realize the global issues today. In order to even obtain legal citizenship, the process takes a lot of time and money. Currently, there are 5 steps in this process. Immigrants must first have a qualifying green card, which is basically telling you you lived here, and that's a whole different process. You must file the form, get fingerprinted, be interviewed, and then attend an oath ceremony if you get accepted. But as of 2018, it costs $725 to file for the application process. And this price fluctuates depending on the decline in the naturalization of the less educated and likely lower income immigrants. And naturalization is basically another term for the path to citizenship. So when the price goes up, naturalization rates go down, and in return the price goes up even more, which makes no sense because no one is applying. Furthermore, it takes an average of 5 to 8 years to become a legal citizen, which should be shortened in this day and age. Both the price fluctuation and long process creates a barrier to the path of citizenship for most immigrants. And this is the key. This is what steers immigrants full of hope and ambitions away from applying for legal citizenship, which in some cases results to some people staying in this country illegally. If we made the legal process more effective and cheaper, more immigrants would definitely be more open to applying for citizenship, and thus decreasing the amount of illegal immigrants in our country today. Next, but probably the hardest, once you become an American, you have to assimilate to your new society. To put this in simple terms, think of the time you're the new kid. Whether it be at school or work, the culture within those places were definitely new to us and different than what we were used to beforehand. And we could all agree that at one point this was a tough and scary time for all of us. But now step into the shoes of an immigrant who is unfamiliar with the language, people, and even the behaviors. These three different aspects, along with many others, make up a country's culture. And when you're unfamiliar with everything that is surrounding you, you're experiencing a phenomenon known as culture shock. The feeling of culture shock could lead one immigrant to feel isolated and alone. And heck, not even feel American, because how could you possibly convince yourself that you're an American when you act and look different from everyone else and you're also experiencing discrimination at the same time? Because U.S. public opinion polls from previous decades show Americans have largely opposed admitting large numbers of refugees from countries where people were fleeing from war and oppression, as you can see on the slideshow. Which is a little hypocritical because our country was built on the core values of freedom, opportunity for all, and if we strip these chances away for future Americans, we're stripping them away from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As you could tell, we lack empathy towards immigrants. When we earlier stepped into the shoes of an immigrant, we saw and understood how difficult it was for them. By supporting immigrants with open arms, we could make them feel a little bit more at home. This nation that we're currently standing on was built by and continues to be shaped by immigrants. The numerous benefits immigrants bring to our country, such as diversity, economic growth, and globalization is vital and key to this country. Without them, America would not be the same today. However, the chances are dwindling every day at this pace. And these modern immigrants deserve a chance just like everyone else did in the past. And for one, my mom's story is just one out of the lucky million stories like her grandparents or great ancestors. And in the future, I want future Americans to be able to share their story like my mom's. Thank you.